The paper will deal with the problem which is quite acute now as it was acute 3,500 years ago of leadership. And it will be limited, restricted to the Sidra Beha'aloscha, which is one of the most difficult Sidras in the entire Chumash, in the entire Pentateuch. The Sidra of Beha'aloscha is very puzzling. It is puzzling for two reasons. First, certain events described in the Sidra are incomprehensible. We simply do not know why they happened, the etiology of those events, and what purpose were they pursuing. I'll give you just an example, what I want to explain. We do not understand the story about Miriam's criticism of Moses, her disapproval. It is hard to grasp that Miriam, the devoted and loyal sister, who as a little girl stood alone on the shore of the Nile to watch the floating ark because she had faith and hope as far as her brother is concerned, her little brother, the baby in the ark, while all adults, including the mother and father, resigned and abandoned the baby. This sister, it is quite puzzling, should suddenly turn into an accuser, into a prosecuting attorney of her great brother. Strange. Equally ununderstandable, incomprehensible, is the strictness and the suddenness and the speed with which the Almighty meted out the punishment. Equally difficult to grasp is the connection between this episode and the tragedy which was recorded in the Torah prior to the description of the Miriam episode, namely the tragedy of Kivrot HaTa'ava, of the graves of the voluptuaries. This is one difficulty. There is a second difficulty. Moses went through many crises. He lived through many distressful experiences and moments. The worst of all was, you understand, you know that, was the ego experience, which threatened to terminate the very relationship between God and Israel. Yet, he was never panicked. He never did act out of despair, black despair. He never complained. On the contrary, steadfastly and heroically, he petitioned the Almighty for forgiveness, defending, like an attorney in the court, defending the people arguing their case. Chazal express themselves by using a metaphor, Vaychal Meishe, and Vaychal in contradistinction to Vayivakesh, in contradistinction to Vayischanen Meishe, emphasizes the element of strength and boldness. There is bold prayer, and there is prayer, humble prayer. Vaychal has the connotation of bold prayer. So Chazal say in a very strange metaphor, but it's a beautiful metaphor. Melamed shetofas Meishe la Kodesh Baruch Hu b'bigdei. V'yomar le hineni manichacho in Leitechaper Avinu. Moses sees the corner of the mantle, Kaviyachol of the Almighty, and said, I will not let you lose unless you forgive the sin of the people. Suddenly, as far as Moshe began to complain in our Sidra, when the Asafsuf, the multitude, began to rebel, Moshe, instead of defending the people, began to complain, almost accusing the people. We hear him say things which he never uttered. ויאמר משה אל השם למה הראיסו לעבדך ולמה לא מוצא חן בעיניך ולא מסמצו כל העם עלי לא יוכל אנכי לבד לעשות את כל העם הזה במכוך לעשה לי אורגני נורק ועל ערב ברוסי words which have never been uttered by Moses. Yes, a similar phrase he uttered. I mean, if you remember, when he was sent to Pharaoh, and his first errand, his mission ended in complete failure. So he came back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he said, Loma ze ve'loma ze shlachtani. However, he never repeated this question. It was a question of a young man who is not experienced. But Moshe, as the leader who took the Jews out of Mitzrayim, never repeated this question. It is not Moshe-like to act like a frightened person and to speak out of the depth of resignation as if he were, and to condemn the people. However, this I gave you two examples of events which require interpretation to understand. We have to study Chumash the way we study Gemara. We have to analyze, conceptualize the Chumash, and find in every verse the meaning, the connotation, and actually a tenet or principle. However, the most difficult problem with Beha'aloscha is not limited to the substance of the events as that of continuity of the Sidra. At first glance, we are perplexed by the lack of systematic development of the story which the Torah was trying to tell us. The latter was always careful about continuity and wholeness of the narrative. The Torah never tells us half a story. There is always development, transition, complete narration. When the Torah is finished with the story is complete. However, as far as Beha'aloscha is concerned, we don't know. We don't know how many stories there are in Beha'aloscha, how many stories are complete, how many are incomplete. And simply you don't see the continuity. You don't see the thread of continuity in Beha'aloscha. Let us just simply review Beha'aloscha, the events which were recorded in the Sidra of Beha'aloscha. It starts, Beha'aloscha commences with what? With the Kiddush Alvim. Beha'aloscha took psukim to the Menere, and Chazal were right that Beha'aloscha's Menere actually belongs into Parshas Nosim. That's what Rashi wanted to convey, so indeed, the Sidra Beha'aloscha begins with the Kiddush Alvim, when after is some Tnufa. Then the Torah tells us about what follows the Kiddush Alvim, what follows? Pesach. Pesach Sheni. It is Pesach Bashonu HaShenis and Pesach Sheni. I mean, when you say Pesach Sheni, halachically Pesach Sheni refers to the Pesach which is offered in Niyah by the Chacheko and the Tummy. But here the story is the Pesach Bashonu HaShenis, Bashonu HaShenis. And of course, the Torah has recorded to within the framework of the Pesach Bashonu HaShenis, the incident with the Tmeim. They've approached Moshe, and Loma Nigora Madasa Lishem, L'Akref Pesach B'Me'adei, and Moshe inquired of the Almighty, and the institution of Pesach Sheni was established. Yeah. Right. Where is the transition from the Kiddush Alvim to Pesach Bashonu HaShenis? We don't know. Two different stories. There is no continuous development. Then, following the description of Pesach Bashonu HaShenis and Pesach Sheni, we have another description of what? Of the cloud, the Amud Onan, guiding the people on their journeys. There is no transition from the story about the Pesach to the story about the Amud Onan. And the Torah tells us in detail how the journeys of the Bnei Yisrael are completely dependent upon the position of the Amud Onan. L'Shi'olei She'onon Me'al Eil Machaken Yisru Bnei Yisrael. Following the narrative about the Onan, the Torah relates to us the commandment pertaining to Chatzetzres, the two trumpets, and their use for assembling the community and the journeying of the camps. And the Torah describes almost in detail the signal system connected with the Chatzetzres. One blast, one camp moved, another blast, second camp moved. So where I mean, the Truhe, the Tkiyah. And the conclusion of the section dealing with the Chatzetzres, what does the Torah do? The Torah resumes the previous theme, the journeying of the Machnes. And again tells us in detail the order in which the camps traveled. Judah at the head, followed by Yisachar, and so forth. Then, after the Torah describes the organization of the Machnes and how they moved from spot to spot, how they traveled, suddenly we hear a very strange conversation, which actually, I mean, prima facie is puzzling and enigmatic. A conversation between Moses and his father-in-law. Father-in-law and Moses extending an invitation to his father-in-law, but humbly extending. Humbly. ויסלון אל עיניים, ויעתיב השייטה בדשם, ונטיבימוך. Moshe arguing with his father-in-law. He wants his father-in-law to leave Midian and to join the Bnei Yisrael. Yisrael is a bit stubborn, I mean. Fine. Following the conversation, we suddenly are confronted with a parsha consisting of two psukim, Vayi bin Seyaor, Vayima Moshe, Uvinuche Yemar, two psukim, At the beginning of the parsha there is an inverted nun. At the end of the parsha there is an inverted nun. In order to emphasize that this parsha is out of context here. Indeed it is out of context. And the question is obvious. What is the question? If it's out of context, so why should the parsha, why did the Torah insert the parsha in a place or into a section which is within which the parsha will always, stand out as out of context? The parsha could have been beautifully inserted, where could this parsha be inserted? At the end of Pkudei, at the end of Exodus, Ki anana d'Shem ala Mishkan, Yemo, ve'ishti Eloilo bei, le'ini kol Yisrael b'chol masayim. So the two psukim would have been the most appropriate conclusion or sequel to that. And finally, following the Parshas Vayibin Seyaron, the Torah tells us the tragic story, a very tragic story, we'll analyze the story, of the Kivri Satahava, of the people who desired. They didn't do anything else. No crime, no avedizore, no retziche, no givaroes, no gzele, no gnele, nothing. They haven't raised their voices. They just were overcome by a desire. And they wept. That's all. Didn't yell. Didn't throw stones at Moses. Like their actions in other situations. Nothing. They didn't say anything. They were not threatening anybody. Just complaining. People have a desire. This tragic story is told, and the name Kibbutz HaTaivo could have been invented today to characterize and to portray Mother Man. It is the grave of the desire, the grave which man digs for himself, or I would rather say, the grave which the desire digs for man. The grave of the Beha'alotcha. And finally the conclusion of that Sidra is with the story of Miriam. We simply are perplexed. How many stories are in Beha'aloscha? One story or several stories or many stories? What do you say? Several. I'm not asking for the number. It would be wrong whatever any number you mention. But I'm asking one or more or many. If it's one, there must be a transition. If there's no transition, there's no gradual and systematic development of a theme, there is no unity. Whoever writes composition paper, first year of English, knows there must be unity. Unity means when a theme is developed. Prima facie, there is no development of anything, there is no unity. There's no literary unity. There are many stories. But each story per se is half a story, not a complete story. We feel, when a matter of fact, whatever I'll tell you tonight, occurred to me during crises on Shabbos. It's completely new. You wouldn't find it. No one plagiarized me yet. I'm just revealing my thoughts to you tonight for the first time. You see. I had a feeling when about 3 years I was reading the Sidra, as if we were jumping like a bee in a clear, warm summer morning from flower to flower, accumulating the sweet nectar. Is it possible, let me ask you as Rabbis, Rabbonim, is it possible that the principle of Ardus Torah is unity of the Torah, of the themes which the Torah develops, was lost in the Parshas Beha'aloscha? It's an impossibility. Now let me move slowly and see. I mean, of course, my job is, you understand very well, to restore the unity of the Parsha. Parsha is one story, a tragic story which has changed Jewish history completely, from top to bottom. The Nunim Hapuchim symbolize an inverted historical process. But a Nun Hapuch is not so bad, an inverted Nun. But if history is being inverted, not realized, or stopped suddenly, it's very tragic. Chazal speak about Peronius in Beha'aloscha as the worst distressful event in Jewish history. Chazal said. Let us start with Yetzias Mitzrayim. When the Almighty charged Moshe with the assignment of redeeming the Jews, or liberating them from Egypt, he told them the following words. He told them many things. But the Chinuch, the Beha'aloscha says, the motto of Yetzias Mitzrayim is the following sentence. V'zelach oheis, konechi shlachticho, v'yitziacho esom mitzrayim, tavdu nesrekim al or hazeh. And it shall be your sign that it was I who sent you, when you will free the people from Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Difficult sentence, difficult word. In other words, I'm merely plagiarizing a bit Balachim, the Beha'aloscha. In other words, the Almighty told Moses, the Exodus drama will culminate in two events. How many, the word Tavdun Esrikim al or hazeh, how many events does it encompass, does it embrace? The word Tavdun Esrikim al or hazeh. How many events? What it means, Yetzias Mitzrayim will not be consummated as long as you will not worship God at this mountain. What did God mean by it? Worship God at this mountain. What did he mean by it? What did Moshe understand? What did Moshe understand by the word Tavdun Esrikim al or hazeh? I mean, simply, what does it mean? So the Chinuch says very well, he meant two things. First of all, Matan Torah, the giving of the law. I mean, the Torah, teaches man how to worship God. It's a continuous worship of God. The man who lives al pi Torah, in accordance with principles and rules of the Torah, he is a steady worshipper of God. Yeah. There is no neutral moment. The worship is a continuous process. However, he meant something else, namely what? The construction of the Mishkan. Certainly, within the purpose of the Mishkan is what? Is the worship. As a matter of fact, the Torah was given at the Mount Sinai, and the Mishkan was constructed when? Immediately after Moses came down from the mount, and immediately the fellow started the work of constructing the Mishkan. On the day or the following day after Moses, came down from the mountain, assembled the people, and told them that a Mishkan should be constructed. It's no wonder that following the Aseret HaDivrei, following in Parshas Yisrael, God mentioned to Moses what? The construction of a Mizbeach. Mizbach Adomo Tasali. Hadn't the Jews succumbed to the hysteria of the Erev Rav, had they rejected the Egel, the two objectives would have been realized much sooner, of course. Because of the Egel, the time schedule was changed and the consummation of the Tavdunes Elekim al Or Hazeh was delayed for how many days? For how many days? 80 days, correct? If the Egel had not been made, and the whole tragedy of the Egel could have been avoided, so Moshe would have come down on Shivasa Betamuz, and immediately they would have started to construct the Mishkan. Because of the Egel, Moshe had to spend on Mount Sinai in prayer 80 more days. So Moshe came back from Mount Sinai, the day following Yom Kippur, and so the construction of the Mishkan was delayed for 80 days. However, on the morning of Yom Kippur, after Moses came down with the second Luchas, and with the message of forgiveness, he quickly assembled the congregation and told them about the immediate task to be discharged, namely the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. The work of construction commenced immediately. How long did it take them to construct the Mishkan, to complete the work? How long? The Mishkan was completed and put together on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Rosh Chodesh Nisan, according to Chazal, was a Shmini Lemeluim. The day on which the Nosim began to offer their gifts to the Beis HaMikdash. When those two objectives, Matan Torah and Binyan Beis HaMikdash, were achieved, so the Geula found its realization. The Tavdunes al Or Hazeh was translated into reality, into fact. The people, therefore, had no business of prolonging their stay in Midbar Sinai. They stayed in Midbar Sinai as long as what? As long as it was necessary to receive the Torah, and the Torah had to be received, obtained twice, due to the Egel, and as long as it was necessary to construct it, and as long as it was necessary in order to complete the work on the Beis HaMikdash, because both come under are encompassed by the commandment, Tavdu Nel Selekim al Or Hazeh. But the very moment the second Luchas were delivered to Yisrael, the Beis HaMikdash was constructed, the work completed, the Kohanim elected, and the Korbanos offered, so then the task of Yisrael in Midbar Sinai was discharged and fulfilled. There was no purpose in extending the sojourn any longer. Now let us see. The Torah in Nosim tells us about the final act of the dedication of the Mishkan. Namely, the sacrifices by the Nosim. The Torah did not forget to mention a secondary matter like the Kiddush Alvim. The Torah apprises us in Tzav about Kiddush Kene, which was of primary significance. In a word, with the dedication of the Mishkan by the Nosim and the election of the Levim, everything which was necessary in order to have the Mishkan serve the great purpose of Aveda, was prepared and ready. The work was completed. As a matter of fact, when could the Bnei Yisrael simply get up and leave Midbar Sinai? So the Mishkan was completed on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Nosim, 12 Nosim offered their gift. The Almighty said, Nos echod layem yakriv es karbonei. So it means Rosh Chodesh Nisan plus what? Plus 12 days more. It means they were ready on the 13th of Nisan to march. However, the Ronon did not move, did not rise. Because Erev Pesach, we march. Erev Pesach. We march, tomorrow is Erev Pesach. Tomorrow is the Korban Pesach offer. When we march now, in the desert. So their march was postponed until after Pesach. So, but everybody knew that the stay of the Jews in Midbar Sinai, in the Sinai wilderness, came to a close. The job was done, the task discharged, the Beis Hamikdash built, the Torah was given. Now we have to march, to resume our march. However, the march was, as I said, delayed until after the Jews offered the Korban Pesach. The second Pesach they celebrated in Midbar Sinai. וידבר עד השם על משה במדבר סיני בשנה השני לצאתו מארץ מצרים בחודש הראשון לאמר ויעשו בני ישראל את הפסח. I postpone the journey until after the Korban Pesach will be offered. So the Torah why did the Torah tell us in Beha'aloscha about the Korban Pesach the second year? Because the Korban Pesach was the only handicap, the only obstacle, as far as what? As the resumption of the march is concerned. And during the Akrovas HaPesach, the Tmeim inquired about their status. Moshe Rabbeinu, asked the Almighty, and the institution of Pesach Sheni was introduced. For those who were unable, to offer the Pesach in Rosh Chodesh Nisan. There is perfect continuity. The Kiddush Alvim is the last act of Tavdun V'Felikim Avorazeh. It was not as important as Kiddush HaKenim. That's why about Kiddush HaKenim the Torah tells us in Tzaven and Titzaveh. Kiddush Alvim is not so important. You could operate the Beis Hamikdash without the Levim. Shire is not indispensable, you understand. It's quite possible as a lady is kosherly shire, you understand. Quite possible. So the Levim is more or less, was in luxury actually, more or less. But the Torah tells us, every detail was completed, we were ready to march. The Almighty told Moses to offer the Pesach first in Midbar Sinai, and after the Pesach was offered, the Bnei Yisrael were supposed to resume their march. In a word, I repeat, the two prerequisites for moving on were met. The Torah given and accepted, the Mishkan ready for worship. The great march, and I underline it, the great march was supposed to start. The march, where? Where? Mid old question, where? 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 Where march? Pretty much there's one place they had to march. Not back to Mitzrayim. March to Eretz Yisrael. All four freedoms were attained. The Ritzesi, the Tzauti, the Goalti, and the Matan Tere, and the Bina Migdosh, the Volakachti was realized as well. The hour is struck for the fifth freedom, to be realized and translated into a reality, namely the Evasius. Now, how long was the march supposed to last? What do you say? I can't. What? 11 days. But Rashi is a little differently. You know the Rashi in Dvorim, but the Rashi in Balesra is different. A year? 2 years? No. Just what? A short time anyway, several days. We'll see how many days Chazal interpreted. Several days. That's why the Torah revealed to us the details of the march. First, who was the guide? Who was the leader? If you march toward a certain destination, particularly in the desert, you need a leader. So the answer is, the Torah gives the answer. Who was the leader of that march? Who was the leader? Who was the guide? The Amud Honor. Amud Honor was just an instrument in the hands of the Almighty. The guide was the Almighty. The Torah told us in Bishalach, Hashem Melech L'Fnei Yemam, Ba'amud Honor V'Layla V'Mesei Shlach Chesam Aderech. Now the Torah tells us how the camps were arranged, marching. Which tribes formed the avant-garde, and which tribes formed the rear guard. Me'asif v'chol Anachnu. The Torah speaks of Tzivesom, of the host, of warriors, kol Yetzitzova. The Torah also relates to us the story of the Shtei Chatzitzris in this context, because it's very important. The story of the signal system. Moshe was the commander, so to say, in chief. He directed and instructed the various camps on their march to the promised land. There was need for communication. And the means of communication were the two silver trumpets, the Chatzitzris from Kesef. And if you read carefully, Beha'aloscha, Balakri, Beha'aloscha, along Sidra, Balakri, Rash, Sidra. So you feel in the Psukim, Vayisu me'ara d'Hashem derech shleishes yamim, v'arein bris ad Hashem nefei alifneim derech shleishes yamim, lo salem menucha. V'soku be'em v'im'achas yisko, uskatem truo v'nosu amachnes achenim kedmo, uskatem truo shenis v'nosu amachnes achenim k'timono, truo yisko l'chol maseim. You feel, what do you feel in that? I mean, I felt it, I don't know, perhaps you didn't feel anything, so I can't say. I felt it. When you hear, Torah is not only important, it's not only important to explain the Torah in intellectual categories, but also in emotional categories. If you want to understand the beauty and the greatness of the Torah, is the emotional mood which is created by Kriyas HaTorah is perhaps more important than the intellectual gesture. What do you feel? I feel a mood of expectancy and tension. A mood of expectancy permeates the pages of Beha'aloscha. You feel a mood, there is a mood of mobilization and rigid order in the air. All conditions were met. The reward is about to be granted. Finally, the promise to Abraham is about to be fulfilled. The Vivesi will become the fifth freedom. The people are on their final triumphal march. Now, in this context, I would rather say in this mood, Moshe was excited. It was very hard to excite Moshe. Moshe was excited. He was expecting great things. There is tenseness in the air. And there is determination, boldness, to break through if necessary. Interesting is the conversation between Moses and his father-in-law. What does it mean? What does this conversation, what kind of a mood on the part of Moshe is mirrored or reflected by this conversation? What is this conversation? We get a glimpse into Moses, into his mood. Those days, after Pesach, the second Passover, when the Pesach was offered, and the people started to march. Vayi b'shana hashenis, b'chedesh hasheni, b'esrim b'chedesh, nalo olam, vayisu b'nei Yisrael, l'maseh. It was not one of the many journeys. It was the journey, the final journey. After that journey, Moshe expected there would be no need to journey anymore, to travel. What does the conversation Vayima Moshe lechiva v'Yisrael lechiva beruira midyon chesed Moshe Moshe Anachnu amokim asher Omer ad Hashem eisi yetem lecho yitonu v'yitabnu loch kad Hashem diber teiv al Yisrael. What impression do you get? I mean, what is the emotional climate of that? Of the Torah extent? No. I mean, after all, you have a great Hashanim among you in the hall. What is? It is climate of serenity, of peace of mind, an unqualified assurance. Moses spoke of the final journey to the promised land. No waiting anymore. No animamin b'bias HaMashiach. Afal pishis mamea b'chol zeh. There'll be no need for it anymore. No delays, no procrastination, no if, and no when, im shamea tishmu. No if, no when, it is. It is now. It is going to happen now, right now. Not tomorrow. Right now. Vayemer Moshe lechiva ben Ruira Midyoni. Chise Moshe, Nosim Anachnu. Present tense. Not Anachnu Nisa. Oh no, not Nisa. Nosim Anachnu. Elamokim asher Omer ad Hashem eisi yetem lecho yitonu v'yitabnu loch kad Hashem diber teiv al Yisrael. All the promises will be fulfilled. I wouldn't have to ask questions. No problems, no questions, no doubts, nothing. It is very simple. And I want to let you in another secret. It was not an invitation extended to the father-in-law. It's not an invitation which a son-in-law extends to his father-in-law. It was not an invitation by an individual to another human being to share the good things in life. It was more than that. It was an invitation extended to whom? By Moses, representative of the Klal Yisrael, to whom? Huh? To all Gerim. To all Gerim of all generations. The Midrash in Kelefe, Kol Anachnu Melchim Alayom, Vayom Einu Malei, Elu Agirim Sheboim L'Eretz Yisrael Yisrael. It was extended to all Gerim, to the entire non-Jewish world. Join us. To come to join us in the promised land, provided, of course, there is a one condition. We have one condition. Correct. Not Beha'alotcha, but Beha'alotcha. Correct. No ifs, no whens. To come to join us in the promised land, provided the non-Jew is ready to subject himself to the same divine discipline as we did. Any human being was offered the opportunity to join the march to the promised land, the march to the Messianic era. If that march had been realized, the Beis HaMashiach would have taken place when? Then Moses would have been the Mashiach, the Malach Mashiach. It was quite optional. The Jews could have reached it. They lost it. So Moses is not a Malach HaMashiach. Malach HaMashiach is not Moses. And the distance in time between them is long and far. Oh, of course, the Torah, I always say, the Torah was given to us, certainly. Eretz Yisrael was granted to us, certainly. However, we were told to pass on God's word to mankind as such. We know we all remember the famous verse. We say in Shifres Rosh Hashanah, Kol yeshech ne'eretz v'yesh v'sevel, Kol yeshech ne'eretz v'yesh v'sevel, ken seinei thorim tiru, v'cheskei ha'shefer tishmor. We are all invited. All the dwellers on this world. Nosim Anachnu el Amokim, asher omar ad Hashem, eisei etim, lechoi tonu ve'tavnu loch. But does Moshe think that Yisrael Dagoy is dependent upon us? Our Torah is commodious enough to encompass the entire world. There is enough chesed, goodness and happiness in the Torah to be transmitted to others and to be shared by others. Join our triumphal march, Moses said to Israel, toward our destiny. It may become your destiny as well. And when I read this parsha, whenever I do read this parsha, it attracts me. There is something moving, touching in that parsha. What is moving? Sometimes I want to cry when I read this parsha. What is there? Something moving, something touching. I want to cry. I have to control my tears. No. Mir a goy, what do you expect from a goy? A goy, when I'm a chuten for a Grecian Eden, but a goy, what a goy? No. What is moving here is the simplicity, with which the great Moshe, the master of all wise men, and the father of all prophet, speaks. What do I mean? He uses the grammatical first person. Nosim Anachnu, lechoi tonu, ve'itavnu loch, ateva sheyitav ad Hashem amon imonu. What does it mean? Moshe was certain, there was not even a shadow of a doubt in his mind, that he is going to enter the promised land. He and the entire congregation will be classified as both Yetze Mitzrayim and Boye Oretz. He was sure. He was convinced that he will see what? The Oretz HaTeva, the beautiful land, the hills of Judea, and the prairie land of Emek HaSharon. He was certain that he will climb the mount of the Lebanon. Later he prayed, but his prayer did not come true. Hebron over Eretz, Oretz HaTeva, this, but that time he felt no need for prayer. Nosim, Anachnu, V'choi Tonu, V'itavnu Loch, HaTeva Sheyitava B'Shem Imonu, V'itavnu Loch. There was no doubt about his destiny. The whole operation, if successfully brought to a close, would have lasted several days. And that time there was no need for miracles, for scouts to explore the land, to see whether the land is good or bad, as we read it this morning, or whether the cities are surrounded by wall or they're open cities, or whether what kind of a population is there, strong, weak, a sickly population, a healthy population. There was no need for it. All those scouts and all the explorations and all the intelligence work is necessary if a man has doubts. This was the pre-doubt period in Jewish history. Nosim, Anachnu, share with us, invitation, and not an invitation to everybody. Yisrael or no Yisrael, father-in-law of Moses or a stranger. The Torah tells us indeed, Vayisu me'arad Hashem derech shleishes yomim, ve'arein bris ad Hashem nesei alifneihem derech shleishes yomim, loso menucha, and they journeyed from the mount of the Eternal 3 days journey, and the Ark of the Covenant went before them in the 3 days journey. Where did they travel? Where to? And where is Loso and Menucha? Where is Menucha for the Jew? What was the destination? Rashi, quoting the Sifri, says, Me'alech shleishes yomim hochu b'yem echad. Shehoy HaKadosh Baruch Hu chofetz la'achnisam le'eretz Yisrael miyad. A distance of 3 days journey, they miraculously traveled in 1 day, because the Almighty wanted to bring them into Eretz Yisrael, into the land. So, my dear friends, tell me, that time, before the great reversal took place, was the Parsha of B'nai Aaron in its proper place, or out of context? Before the Jews alienated God, before they fell from Him, and they needed miracles and scouts and they had doubts, before every Jew was convinced this is the final consummation, the consummation of all hope. It was beautiful, the Torah tells us. Manna d'Shem abarim brisa d'Shem nesei alifneihem derech shleishes yomim lo solem menucha. Manna d'Shem aleim yemam v'layla in security on all sides. And vayibin say Aaron, leading them right into Eretz Yisrael. Vayemam Meishe, kumu ad Hashem v'yafutzu yivecha v'yinusu b'sanecha mipanecha. Who were the enemies? As a matter of fact, the last war they fought was Milchemes Amalek. The next war was the Milchemes Sichaweg, 40 years later. What did Moshe speak about enemies and fiends and people who threatened them? What did Moshe have in mind when he said it? We are traveling fast, enormous speed out of this oil. They will be confronted by somebody. There would, if the great hope had been realized, there wouldn't have been need, to engage in battle for 7 years. It was not in its place. It was right, the continuation of the great story of the final triumphal messianic march into Eretz Yisrael, which was supposed to take place 3,500 years ago, approximately. It was certainly didn't came off, and there was no need for an inverted noon at the beginning and for an inverted noon at the end. It was actually, it would have been the climax or the apex of the whole story. Had this come true, nothing had happened. The whole Jewish history would have taken a different turn. According to our tradition, Chazal said it many times, had Moshe entered Eretz Yisrael, the latter would have never been snatched away from us, taken away from us. Why? Because then Moses would have been crowned as the Melech HaMashiach. The Messianic Kireh would have been in command, who is the conquest of the land by Moses. Moshe believed with a great passion and love that the final march of redemption has begun. It's only a question of days. Suddenly something happened. Something happened. Neither Moses, nor the Almighty, nor anybody else expected, neither Moses nor anybody else expected the event to happen, to transpire. What happened? I asked you before, what happened actually? About the eagle, you know what happened. About the miracle, you know what happened. About the prayer, Midian, 40 years later, you know what happened. What happened here? What happened? Nothing in particular. If you want, you can dismiss it. That's nothing. And the mob, or the crowd, the multitude that was among them fell a lusting, or felt a lust. That's all. Had a desire. And the children of Israel also wept again and said, who shall give us flesh to eat? And the Torah tells us that this seizure by a desire, it was seized by a desire, or a lust, was evil. It aroused the wrath of the Almighty, and also Moses resented it. In Moses' eyes, it was evil. Ubeine Meshera, first time in Jewish history. Moshe is not the defense attorney. It is evil. It has interrupted the great march. It has brought the march to an end. The vision of Moshiach, of Eretz Yisrael, of Gulas Yisrael, became a distant one, like a distant star on mysterious horizon. It twinkled, but was the road suddenly became almost endless. Why? Why did Moshe feel, I asked at the beginning, why did Moshe feel discouraged? Why didn't he offer prayers for the people as it was his practice with regard to past situations? Why did he? Why, what happened? Because the incident of Kivrei Satayre differed greatly from that of the eagle. The making of the eagle was a result of great primitive fright. The people thought that Moses was dead. They were afraid of the desert. They did not know what the future held in store for them. They were simply overwhelmed by a feeling of loneliness and terror. Consequently, they violated the precept of Avodah Zarah. There were mitigating circumstances. They wanted the golden calf actually to substitute for Moses. Matter of fact, all Rishonim say so. They were concerned, however, when you speak about Avodah Zarah, you have to distinguish between two things. Between Avodah Zarah, idolatry, and simply as a ritual, as a worship, as a ceremonial. Right? And between a pagan way of life. As a matter of fact, in Chazal's opinion, a Eved Avodah Zarah will also adopt a pagan way of life. But we know we live in this age, this day and age. We know that it's possible for people to live like pagans, even though no idolatry is involved. Paganism is not the worship of an idol. It encompasses more than the worship of an idol. A certain style of life, a way of life. What is the pagan way of life in contradistinction to the Torah way of life? The pagan cries for variety, for boundlessness, for unlimited lust, an insatiable desire, the demonic dream of total conquest, of drinking the cup, pleasure, to its dregs, actually attract the pagan. The pagan way of life is the very antithesis of Yahadus. The latter demands limitedness of enjoyment and the ability to step backwards, if necessary, the ability to withdraw, to retreat. That the unlimited desire, or what is called hedonei, what the Greeks called hedonei, is the worst form, is actually the worst desire in man. The man reaches out for the unreachable. The man reaches out for the orgiastic and hypnotic. Then they don't violate the Isser of Avodah Zorah, but they adopt the pagan way of life. And the Torah hated the pagan way of life more than it did hate the idol. Because an idol cannot exist for a long time, cannot last. Finally, intelligent person realizes that it's just to glue the metal. It has no life, the Avodah Zorah per se is short-lived. However, a pagan way of life has a tremendous attraction for people. The Torah describes so beautifully the way in which the pagan gathers, accumulates property, gathers the sloth, the quails. How he gathers property, means of gratification of his hungry senses. Vayokomom kolayim v'cholalayim over the Torah describes it. V'choyim amochros vayasvu es aslov amami dosa basoro chamorim vayishtucho lachem shoteach b'svilis amachne. They were mad with desire. There was no controlling, limiting element in their desire for vastness. The imagination the imagination actually excited them, and the goods of sense were surrounded with a nimbus which was irresistible. The more the better. And you start gathering new goods even before you completed the gathering of the other goods. The pagan is impatient and insatiable. That's what the Torah describes in Kivas Atava. There's another story in the Torah which, in contradistinction to the unlimited desire of the pagan, the Torah describes the Jewish way of life. It's interesting. It's the man. And Moses said to them, that is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. Gather as much of it as each of you requires to eat, and honor the person for as many as you as there are. But when they measured it by the honor, he who has gathered much had no excess, and he who gathered little had no deficiency. This is the way, the approach of Yahadus. The great tragedy happened. The triumphal final march suddenly came to a stop. A people which rejected the basic principles of economic limitedness and aesthetic enjoyment, the people are not worthy of entering the land. Suddenly, what happened? The Parsha of Vayibin Seyaron found itself dislocated. The march to that land, the distance to that land, suddenly became very long. Of course, there was no edict yet concerning the 40 years, the time the people will have to spend in the desert. But Moses felt intuitively that the great march came to an end. Hopes he had will be unfulfilled, and visions he had will not be realized, and his prayers will be rejected. He knew that. I'll tell you frankly, I don't have to say Moses. Moses was the master of the prophecy. Even God didn't reveal it to him. I remember my own experience. I remember during the illness of my wife. She was sick for 4 years. And of course, I believe, even though I'm a realist, and it's very hard to fool me. Not even doctors can fool me. But I realized that somehow I was convinced that somehow she'll manage to get out of it. And I lived with hope and tremendous unlimited faith. But I remember it was the last Yom Kippur before she died. And it was Kol Nidrei, and I was holding a Sefer Torah for Kol Nidrei. And then with the Chazal finished Kol Nidrei, Shechianu K'mon V'Gon L'Zman Hazeh, I turned over the Sefer Torah to a Talmud of mine, and I told him put it in the Aron Kodesh. He put it in the Aron Kodesh, apparently didn't put it well, I don't know what. The Sefer Torah slipped and fell, not on the floor, but in the Aron Kodesh. That time I know. Sealed. Don't ask me how I guessed it. Don't ask me what. I felt it is sealed. Nothing will help. And did it all. Then the people of the Roma Mishavim began to complain and to weep. Moses knew. This is the end. He'll never see out Israel. Never. Never. That's why he said, in Kochorat Eisari, or Genin Orek, Val Ere Berosi. And how beautifully Chazal has said, Eldod Umeidod, Misnabim B'machne, what did he say? What did he say, Eldod Umeidod? What was the excitement about? He said just one short sentence. Moshe's hopes, Anachnu Nosim Anachnu, Lechono Imonu, Ve'itavnu Loch, will never come true. Moshe Mes, he'll be buried in the sand dunes in the Midbar. He'll never see the beautiful land and the Lebanon. Moshe Mes, Yeshua Machnis. And then the Parshas Vayibin Seyaron suddenly lost its place. It was dislocated and displaced. You know why it was dislocated and displaced? Because two little Nunim were inverted. The march was inverted. Instead, the march should bring them closer to Eretz Yisrael, so the march took them away from Eretz Yisrael. The Seyaron, the Nun was inverted. And with the inversion of the Nun, Jewish history became inverted. And it is still inverted. The Parsha is still Shalem Kemo. We cannot say Nosim Anachnu. This is the assurance and the certitude with which Moshe said to Yisrei Chesnei, just 24 hours before the Mishadim inverted the Jewish process of Geulah. I believe now the continuity of the Sidra. I didn't just explain the problem of Miriam. I'm going to explain about it. It didn't take long. What you see the doing. The Torah described the Bina Midrash. The Torah describes the Tzias Mitzrayim, not the Torah in Yisrael. Then the Bina Midrash in Truma. Suddenly something happened which interrupted the continuity, the regel. The construction was delayed for a certain number of days. Finally, the Beis was ready. Parshas Vayikro is devoted completely to the Aveda, to Tavdus Lakim al-Horazeh. Then in Bamidbar, the Torah still tells us about the last act, the act of dedication by the Nosim, the Aaron's lighting of the candles, and the Kiddush Avim. So Tavdus Lakim al-Horazeh was attained, the two objectives were reached. Now the march began. The Torah tells us how the Jews were marching on the final triumphal march, on the final triumphal journey to Eretz Yisrael. The Amud Onan covered them, protected them, shielded them. He was in front, and it was also the rear guard protecting them in the back. And then how Moshe communicated with the Machnes, Chatzot Shel Kesef, and then Moshe's conversation with Yisrael. He had out Yisrael already within his reach. He extended the generous invitation to mankind to share in our good and our redemption, and everything was ready. He didn't say a line. It had to take just a few more days. The last few days, something happened. Disaster struck. And that disaster has inverted Jewish history, and that disaster has dislocated the Parshim in the Seir. And that disaster consisted in inverting the march. Instead of marching to Eretz Yisrael, we began to march away from Eretz Yisrael. Where did Moshe discover something else? Moses realized something else. He knew pretty well that he was chosen as the teacher of the Klal Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not elect him as a diplomat, negotiator, but as the teacher or the Rebbe of the people, as their spiritual and moral leader. God himself told the team, when Moses asked me, he said, Tavdus Lakim al-Horazeh. Basically, Moshe, had I been looking for a negotiator, I wouldn't have selected you. But I'm not looking for a negotiator. I can do the melacha of negotiating myself. I need a teacher for my people. As a teacher, you yourself will agree that you are the best one. You are the teacher par excellence. And that's why I selected you. And that is the reason, that I selected thee, not somebody else. As negotiators, there were many people in Mitzrayim who did qualify to assume that responsibility. Because the purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim is not political freedom, but the conversion of a slave society into a Mamlechas Kinevei Kodesh. And for that you are wonderful. Moshe knew about it. However, he did not expect Moshe until the Messiah that he will assume the role not only of a teacher, that he was ready to do since Mitzrayim, but of whom? What did he discover? Of a nursing mother or father. Amen. What is Amen? Amen is not a Rav, not. Amen is a nursing father or a nursing mother. Of course, a nursing mother teaches the baby. Perhaps the mother is the best teacher and the most important teacher in the life of a baby. But she does something else. Namely, the Rebbe teaches the Talmidim. The Amen, the nursing mother, does, in addition to teaching, does something else. Namely what? She carries the baby in her bosom or in her arms. Kasher yiso Amen es hayenik bechekei. What does it mean? He carries the baby in his bosom and in his arms, or in her bosom, in her arms. And usually the father doesn't do it, the mother does it. The father has no patience for that. The mother does it. What does it mean she carries it out? Actually, it is true literally, if you interpret it, but it means more than the literal. It has more meaning than the literal, than the word literally contains. What does it mean? The teacher does teach his disciple, but the disciple does not become a part of him. Very seldom. Then the mother teaches the baby, so the baby becomes a part of her. The mother basically, when she rears and brings up the baby, or when she nurses the baby, has one calling, one purpose, to protect the baby. The Amen or the mother basically do not belong to themselves. A mother, many may be very critical of my statement, but this is true according to others. The mother has no life of her own. She belongs to the infant. As long as the infant is small, helpless, and exposed to danger, to the environment, to a hostile environment. She belongs to the infant. Moshe discovered now that teaching is not enough for a man in Israel. It's not enough. The teacher, no matter how devoted, has a life of his own. That his job is nursing, carrying the baby in his arms, watching every step, guessing the baby's needs. A baby cannot say what she wants. You have to guess. Feeling pain when the baby cries, and being happy when the baby is cheerful. Teaching or instructing are good performances, but it's not everything. Moses, who reconciled with his role as a teacher and leader of adults, began to doubt his ability to play the role of an amen or a mother nurse. Did I conceive all this? Listen to his word. Did I conceive all these people? Did I bear them? That you say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries an infant? Moses knew. What did he know? He discovered something very tragic in Moses' life. People don't pay attention. What did he discover? He knew that from now on, he as an individual, he has no rights at all. He as an individual has no rights at all. He has no right. He has no right to rejoice whenever God will be good to him or to his children as a private person. He is not entitled to enjoy life as an individual, to be happy in an ordinary way like any other human being, because his children will never belong to Moshe. He lost his family. He became the mother or the nurse of the Klal Yisrael. No family of his own. And that's what Chazal say. Piresh mino isha. He separated himself from the wife. It's not a question of the wife only. It's a question of the wife and children. He had two lovely boys. He had a sister. He had a brother. He knew he cannot share his joy with them. They cannot share their joy with him. He is the Favim Shel Yisrael. He is the father of the Klal Yisrael. And that is what he said. Kasher Yisrael, the role of Kasher Yisrael was imposed upon him during the Mishkan rebellion. He separated himself. He withdrew not only from his maid, Sidra, but also from his children. Tell me, where are Moses' children? Have you ever come across Moses' children? Ever? There was a census taken in the Midbar at the beginning of the 40 years and at the end of the 40 years. Are Moses' children mentioned? Not all. Where are Moses' children? Moshe did not have children. And if later in Tanakh, the Bible, the name of Moses' child was mentioned, so it's not Ben Moshe but Ben Menashe. A little nun was added to the word. Why? Not only because in order not to reflect, because the mention would have reflected unfavorably upon Moses. It's ridiculous. Why? Moses was not responsible for what happened to Pesach Moshe, because Moses did not have children. I always say, if Moses had a child, so Al-Pidin would have been in the most awful dilemma. Al-Pidin would have been required of him to give preference to his child, as far as Talmud Torah is concerned, over the child of his next door neighbor. This is our halacha which Moshe Rabbeinu taught us. Bin bnei kedem leben chavere. On the other hand, Moshe had no right to give any preference or to give an additional second to his son, because he is the father of every Jew, of every child who is in the Jewish community. So Moshe lost his children. He became the Raymond, the nursing mother of the Klal Yisrael. And that is exactly what the Kodesh Baruch Hu told him, Shas Matnbeira. Leich emer lahem, shuvu lachem, leolechem, ve'atopei amedemari. You say to them, return into your tent and lead a private life. But you stay here. Moshe realized it during the incident of the Mishkan. And that is what Miriam, the true loyal sister, resented. Does prophecy require of man alienation of his family? Does prophecies that God require of the prophet he should forget his sister and his brother, his children and his wife, and dedicate himself only to the people? And we live a beautiful life with our husbands and children and relatives. And he doesn't interfere with our devotion to the people. And that's exactly what God resented and told him. There is a difference between you and Moses. Yes, you as the ordinary prophet does not have to sacrifice his private interests, his selfish concerns, his family, his father, mother, children, brother, sister. He can be a prophet and communicate with God, at the same time be a devoted father, a loving brother, and a helpful head of the family, but not late Cain of the emotion. He is consecrated fully and wholly to me. And that's how the Parsha of Beha'aloscha concludes. It's a long story, it's a one story of a great march which could have led us into the Messianic era, and was interrupted by some multitude which was permissive, hedonic seekers,